You're listening to Sustainably Geeky, the podcast for everyday environmentalists.
Hi, you're listening to Sustainably Geeky, episode 76. I'm Jennifer, and today I am joined by Sandia Sabathy, the founder of Kaleidoscope and the global head of environment and net zero at Entain, an FTSE 100 company, where she spearheads global sustainability efforts to achieve net zero emissions. We're going to be discussing the importance of inclusivity in the sustainability movement, something that I am very passionate about myself and really interested to hear your perspectives on. So thank you so much for being on. And could you start by just telling us a little bit about your background and how you became active in this space?
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, like you said, my current role is I head up global environment and net zero at Entain, which is a FTSE 100 company. And what that role involves is ensuring that all of our different entities across the world, we operate in 30 countries and have 30,000 colleagues, operates according to the peak environmental principles, and we've got quite ambitious net zero targets as well. And I got into sustainability. I've been in sustainability and social impact for about 10 years now. And I've always been an activist. So predominantly all of my roles have been in corporate. But I do a lot of advocacy with UN Women and have got two board level roles in charities as well. So how I see it is that corporate philanthropy is super important. And I think that the entire world runs, unfortunately, around capitalism now. So it's important for businesses to have a strong corporate citizenship mentality, but also be active in lobbying and creating collective change with public institutions as well as third sector and civil society, so that we make true systemic change as opposed to kind of working in our silos. So yeah, it's kind of my life mission, and I see myself going in and out of maybe staying in corporate, but also going into public policy roles, or of course working with charities directly as well. But it's turned into quite a vocation.
Yeah, so basically working with the companies to get their buy-in and bring them along rather than just saying, here's what you need to do, figure it out kind of thing, right?
Exactly, and I think that people underestimate the fact that in companies it's just also run by people at the end of the day, and people have different passions and interests, and creating collective movements even within the company can be quite effective. And then on the other side as well is that in a lot of cases, even when an organization gets it wrong, I think it's important for them to be transparent about the journey that they're going on, to evolve their perspective when it comes to things. And I think in the space of sustainability right now, there's a lot of conversation around reporting because, especially in the environment space, there is more regulation coming in, especially in the UK and and Europe. And I think it's important that organizations don't just view this as a reporting exercise, but also are deeply involved in the actioning of the things that they say as well. So, as much as I think that corporate foundations do a great job, I think that ensuring from a commercial standpoint as well, organizations view sustainability as something that's embedded in their day to day, has a lot of potential for impact. So, yeah, that's the space that I operate in.
Yeah, that's a great point because I think for a lot of organizations they look at it as a chore or an extra thing to do, and they the ones that look at it as an opportunity and, like you said, aren't afraid to admit when they get things wrong, are going to be the ones that are really going to do it right and maybe set the stage for everyone else. So, well, I guess let's start by just defining some terms before we get too deep into the discussion. What do inclusivity and environmental justice mean to you?
I like both those terms so much because I think that they can get lost sometimes in all of the other things that we discuss. So for me, inclusivity, maybe in the context of sustainability, is emphasizing diverse representation and having equal participation. So I've been thinking about this a lot, especially in the context of these large conferences like COP, that's just wrapping up as we're in Baku right now. And I think that the reason why a lot of these discussions are struggling, and I'm sure we can dive into if COP is fit for purpose to begin with now going forward, is that it's difficult to drive collective action and gain if we're not very good at integrating diverse perspectives. And a lot of these conversations end up becoming quite binary when the issues that cover climate change or social impact are so large, so multidisciplinary, that it's super important to have all of the voices at the table, but then also to have a very strong governance process so that we can take all of those different opinions and turn it into action plans and turn it into something that can be implemented over a period of time. So I use the term just transition a lot and environmental justice because I think that addressing environmental burdens uh, that disproportionately affect marginalized communities is super important. And if we get that right, it's a big piece of the wider puzzle of getting it right for everyone else. So that's kind of how I view inclusivity, especially in the context of kind of sustainability and environmental justice.
Yeah, so you mentioned marginalized groups. What are some of the groups that tend to be overlooked in sustainability activism, and I guess that are affected by the problems that we're trying to address through this activism, and how can excluding these viewpoints undermine the very work we're trying to do?
It's a great question. And I think fundamentally, uh, all of the underrepresented groups or underserved groups, whether it's indigenous communities, individuals with disabilities, or low income areas in the population, these voices have to be heard so that we create solutions that are fundamentally inclusive. Otherwise, otherwise the solutions that we create will be incomplete or actually amplify the inequities. And we saw this during COVID, right? Um, when the world was kind of thrown into disarray, the communities that got impacted by the most were the marginalized communities. So I think it's super important for us to have a very clear idea of all of the different things that impact these marginalized communities so that we can learn from them and then implement solutions. So let me take an example. So if you take emerging markets that are quite fossil fuel dependent right now, many workers, especially in kind of coal, oil, and gas industries, they depend on jobs that are incompatible with the net zero future. And these abrupt transitions risk unemployment and huge economic devastations for these regions. So, one of the things that I probably keep harping on about too much is reskilling and upskilling. And if we really want to just transition, it's important for us to actually invest in people and support them to be employable and not just the industries of now, but the industries of the future, especially in areas like renewable energy and green infrastructures. And the way we can potentially do that is encouraging multiple ways of getting into education. So vocational education, apprenticeships, flexible education as well. Because if we kind of try to streamline education for these quite complex sectors into just one route like university, it isn't affordable for people from all of these different communities, and also leaves out a lot of a lot of people from minority backgrounds that have huge amounts of responsibilities that they have to take care of on top of having a job. So I think that reskilling and upskilling is something that it's not just an investment at a country level, but organizations also need to start getting involved and invest in, because it will be hugely beneficial for them in the future when they're either trying to attract talent or they're trying to balance um, the change that comes from moving from one particular kind of sector to another one in quite a rapid fashion. So yeah, that's kind of where my mind goes when we talk about people who are kind of overlooked and need to go through a period of change to be able to be part of well, not just society but these industries that are rapidly evolving. And sunset industries are going to pretty much occur left, right, and center. And we've seen the pace at which technology has evolved, and it's only going to get faster from here. So it's important for us to actually allow people to be on that journey with us, as opposed to being quite exclusive in this space.
Well, and the other benefit, aside from just helping people, is that you're creating advocates versus opponents, right? Like, you could very easily, by not helping the people who are affected by losing their jobs, et cetera, create people who are going to protest against what you're trying to do, against clean energy, whatever, because they're economics of it all, But if you bring them along, if you give them the training, you explain why it's important and how it will affect not just their lives, but their children's, their grandchildren, I think you get a lot better outcomes with that. And
I totally agree. I totally agree. You can turn it into their superpower. Their employability can be their superpower.
yeah, I think a lot of times in the environmental space, we tend to be seen as very exclusionary, and it's not always unwarranted. I don't know that it's always on purpose, but sometimes that doesn't excuse, leaving people out. It is perception is, reality, I guess. So if we can figure out a way to include people in everything we're trying to do, we won't look like we're just preaching and trying to, I guess, force our views on a lot of folks. So we've talked about, some of the groups that are affected by this. One in particular are women. Women are disproportionately impacted by environmental issues, and at the same time, they're often the ones who play the leading role in advocating for solutions to these issues. Even in places that are, in great conflict or great poverty, you see women stepping up and protesting and taking things, to the public because they're unjust or because they demand better. So what role, or why is gender equity imperative to achieving environmental goals?
I'm really passionate about this topic, and how I see it is that if you look at female leaders in general, there's a great study by Chapter Zero that does executive leadership training around sustainability. And they say that 75% of women leaders who operate in either business or policy, they are fundamentally leaning towards A, being inclusive, and B, being more sustainable in general. So that is the starting point, because if we get women in leadership roles, I always say, if you educate one woman, you educate a village. You are almost getting people in who are going to be thinking about bringing more people at the table, driving more empathy-driven leadership styles, and thinking about both the planet and the communities around them as well. So that's one piece. The other bit is when you look at areas that are hit by natural disasters, women often are the ones that face increased vulnerability and resource scarcity, and are almost excluded in a way, because they sometimes operate to protect and help, and don't necessarily take care of themselves. So finding ways to empower women to take on more entrepreneurial roles and have a space in grassroots activism and policy change, I think, is fundamental as well. So I think there's two sides to this, right? There is getting more women into leadership positions and having a voice at the table, but also supporting women to be able to drive the grassroots activism wherever they are. So I mean, you could look at it for large organizations, for example, to fund small underrepresented organizations and grants. But I think it's more about creating that red thread across everything that you do. If you're a large organization and have the capacity to empower women in leadership roles, do that. If you're a large organization and want to ensure that more women are in leadership roles in the future, look at your middle managers and ensure that you hire diverse at the start. So the entry level roles are also places where you can find women. And when it comes to products that you're building or any of your social impact sustainability initiatives, ensure that not only you consult women, but you involve women in the process of creating anything that goes out, and value their opinion in the life cycle of programmatic building or product building as well. So I think that it's from a concept standpoint, it's more about ensuring that you aren't creating a product, or you aren't creating program for women or to be consumed by women without them in the room. So how I view it is that you need to be quite careful about all of the different areas where you can include women, and find space for them to interact, to build, to grow, and to empower as well. So yeah, that's kind of my take on it. It's not necessarily just about one area that you can focus on, but it's about creating that red thread and having that filter across everything that you do.
Yeah, it's really amazing to think about the amount of products that have been created ostensibly for women without impact or input from women, and just even over time, the medical studies that are done that have never been done on women, and now they're realizing, well, maybe they're inaccurate when they come to treating women because we haven't actually looked at, and even like, I don't know, I think I heard recently that they'd never tested actual menstrual blood when they were testing out
That's
feminine hygiene
wild.
products, for years, and it's just like, if you had a woman in the room.
It's quite obvious if you think about it,
Yeah.
right? And I think it's not these massive big changes sometimes. It's just ensuring that for small things you're also consulting women to be in the room. And I hear that the power of three works, right? So it's not just about having the first woman on the board or the first woman on the team. It's not necessarily even having the second, because there's still kind of a group that may not be able to influence. But the moment you have three in the room, that's when the real change happens. And I think that makes a lot of sense. So and I think that it's not just about having those brilliant ideas that will work in kind of isolated areas when it comes to women. One of my favorite things about how of working for female leaders, or even working in gender equality, is that women fundamentally bring people together, right? So I think that it's a style of leadership that's a bit different, and the world could use a little bit of that right now.
For sure. And yeah, rereading The Handmaid's Tale right now is really driving a lot of this home. It's giving me kind of flashbacks, but hope also, because that's the worst case scenario, obviously. But I do think it's important that not just with women, but with any marginalized group,
Mm.
having representation and having those voices is imperative in anything we do, because we don't know the lived experiences of others, whether they're women, people in the LGBT community, people of different ethnic or racial minorities, people with disabilities. I mean, you could go on and on. So the point is, like, there's no way one person is going to know how this could affect every type of person. So the more voices we have, the better. The better we are for it, I think.
Totally.
You've kind of touched on this a bit, but could you give some examples of inclusive leadership in action, maybe specific stories that you've heard or seen that really resonated with you?
So I've been thinking a lot about climate activism, and one of the speaking engagements that I'm going to do next year, I wanted to bring a young documentarian to talk about her point of view. And the first thing that she said when we were kind of discussing what to talk about was Fridays for a Future, and she was like, Fridays for a Future, but the MAPA version. I was like, what is MAPA? Most, and she was like, most affected people and areas. It's like, all right, let's talk about that then. And I think that I joined Fridays for the Future when I was based in Milan a couple of years back, and I was just so overwhelmed. It made me cry, it made me happy, and I think that anyone that works in climate change or in social impact is one of the biggest fears is that we're not going to be able to solve it in time, right? And it's a multi-generational problem. And are we doing things the right way so that we can protect the planet for the future, etc.? And so, what Fridays for the Future did, of course, it was led by Greta Thunberg, but the millions and millions of young people that joined in through social media or through having these campaigns in their schools. I think that it's still one of my favorite campaigns because it it's a great example of peaceful protest, but protest that resulted in a lot of change. So, for example, in Germany, the Federal Constitutional Court ruled in 2021 as a result of Fridays for the Future, it got up to about 10 million people in Germany that the government's climate protection policies were insufficient. And there are many cases like that. So I think what I really like about Fridays for the Future is that it gave young people a voice, but it also gave them a means to organize by themselves, right? Whether they were at school or at home with their friends on social media. So it's one of my favorite campaigns, and I think that in years from now we will look back at it and hopefully are in a position where we're like, thank God we listened to them. And all of these young people are now, responsible in various different roles in climate change, in whatever industry that they may choose. So let's hope that's the case. The other campaign that came to mind, it was, I think, the first viral campaign, really. It's the Dub's Real Beauty campaign, and it's still quite effective, and it's still going on right now. But talking about beauty as a source for confidence and not anxiety. And I think that's a good example for companies to also unite multiple activists and real people under one cause. And it's a campaign for good at the end of the day. So we think that as from a corporate standpoint, they've done a great job of getting the word out there as well. So those were the two that came to mind, but there are so many, right? When it comes to inclusive leadership, it can be small things as well. Can be teachers in schools. I in multiple roles have worked with schools and colleges. And sometimes it just takes one head teacher or one teacher to get um, groups of young people motivated the right way. So, and I think the fundamental thread when you think of inclusive leadership is it, is are leaders who are thinking about how they can amplify their impact in a way that brings people together, but does not divide. And it may be a simple concept, but in the modern day and age, where you would have these echo chambers and you have people kind of interacting with media that is curated for them, it's, I think, quite fundamental to have people who break those barriers and are able to bring people together in a way that they can have these conversations in a manner that's a safe space as opposed to being divisive. So yeah, I think we need a lot more inclusive leaders. And even if it's probably getting more and more scary right now, I think we need it now more than ever.
Yeah, there's, it's what you were saying about the young folks that are stepping up and doing all these things. It's simultaneously inspirational for me and rage inducing that they even have to do it, because I love to see young people being empowered and making such an impact, but it also breaks my heart that it's gotten to this point that they're having to carry the burden, and they're the ones that will ultimately, and their children, live with these impacts. Our generation's going to see a lot, but we also did more to make it happen, and the ones before us and the young ones unfortunately didn't really do much, and they're having to clean up our mess. But yes, definitely inspirational, and we need to figure out how to, I guess, empower each other and raise the voices of those people that are doing this great work. So on a similar vein, let's talk about intersectionality. This is a term that folks have probably heard a lot lately. It's become more and more common in the environmental space and society at large. But the concept's actually been around for quite a long time. So can you talk about what intersectionality is and why it's such a scary concept for some people, why they resist it?
Yeah, of course. So to me, intersectionality is the overlapping nature of social categorization. So it could be race or gender and class, and their combined effects in individuals' experiences. So um, I think intersectionality is super relevant in sustainability. I've mentioned this before, and sustainability, I think, is both an art and a science. It's very multidisciplinary. Um, but the problem with how people perceive intersectionality is that they think it's exclusionary. They sometimes oversimplify or mischaracterize it. For example, they think that it's divisive and is focused quite solely on maybe identity politics rather than the broader intent of addressing those overlapping kind of inequities. And I think the other element that people struggle with is that it, intersectionality might prioritize certain groups at the expense of others and not be treated as a tool for all. But as with all of these things, that's incredibly reductive. So it's an academic term that was introduced by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989, and it's super relevant in mainstream conversations still. So if you take the Black Lives Matter movement in the context of environmental justice, so the Black Lives movement showed that there are multiple areas across the world where people who come from Black neighborhoods were sitting on toxic facilities and having poor sewage issues. And this was a great way to talk about a very complex topic that highlighted the overlap of racial injustice, environmental activism, public health crisis, and it advocated for systemic change. And there were plenty of lawsuits as well as regulations around that. So I think that intersectionality is super powerful, and it should be viewed as a way to connect people and to view a problem through multiple lenses rather than be exclusionary. And it's similar to feminism as a concept as well, right? Sometimes it can move so quickly into men versus women, but feminism fundamentally means equality and equity for all. So I think a lot of these conversations need to be reframed into the roots of what the concept actually was when it was created. And you can maybe, blame social media a little bit for that because everything has become very kind of fragmented and dissected. But tools, having conversations in the context of a wider umbrella term like intersectionality is super useful, and I use it a lot for the work that I do in kind of the just transition space, because it makes people feel heard. And fundamentally, that's probably one of the most important things when you're thinking about building programmatic options or products, or offering grants to people from different backgrounds.
Yeah, I think we have more in common with people than we realize, and a lot of times, the conflict is either encouraged or intentional, because it's easier for the other side if we don't get along with each other.
Exactly.
Well, you have given some examples throughout the discussion, but what are some ways that organizations, either businesses to volunteer groups, help to create a true culture of inclusivity?
So there are two very common ones that I think a lot of organizations use quite effectively right now. One is use employee resource groups. So create these safe spaces where people volunteer their time and they talk about a particular issue that affects people in the organization, but also could be something that affects wider society at large. The other bit is volunteering, and I think that there's some great tech around this right now. There's Blackbot and Neighborly in the UK as well that does a really good job. But volunteering, especially skill-based volunteering, I think is super powerful. So say you've got an organization of 1,000 people, and those 1,000 people have different roles in the organization. So they're trained up to do different things. And if you find a way to create kind of meaningful programs within the organization so that people can volunteer their time, but volunteer their time in a skill-based manner. So for example, if you're a finance professional, can you work with some charities to build their financial modeling? If you're a lawyer, can you offer pro bono support to women who are impacted by climate change, for example? So I think that it's the reason why I believe in skill-based volunteering is it ensures that you're actually coming together for a valuable exchange of knowledge, and it can be quite productive. It can help increase capacity for small organizations and charities, and it can also, from a reverse mentoring perspective, help people in an organization understand how to think creatively and how to react to certain causes or certain instances that they may see in their day-to-day life, but kind of feel a bit incapable of releasing or having a means to help. So I think volunteering is super powerful. I believe that volunteering is almost just as important as fundraising for large organizations, and there is scale in large organizations that people would love to devote a portion of their time to this. Actually, it helps in team building. It also helps in uniting people around a certain cause. There is also, from a business standpoint, so much of so many benefits around this. So there is collective action can create great active listening if you're building products. It helps continuously reskill and upskill your current workforce, and it helps people think from a different angle, which is very needed in this day and age where products are all driven around innovation and change and agility. So I think that it doesn't have to be just large organizations that partake in this. Small organizations can do it just as easily, and it creates a pretty good culture of inclusivity, and it gives people something to talk about, honestly. So I'm a big fan of skill-based volunteering, and I've seen the change, kind of the cultural change in organizations from doing that and implementing that, especially during COVID. There was a program that we ran. It was called Creating Better Futures with one of the previous organizations I was working with, which impacted 10,000 students across the UK. And how we did it was kind of fractional learning opportunities for all of these students. They were anyway consuming content online, so we effectively rounded up people to give 40 hours of their time every 6 months and ensure that they were kind of trained and facilitated on what to talk about. So they were teaching students about their careers, as well as kind of coming in, helping math teachers talk about math, or um, adding a little bit more color to subjects, because it helps when you are staring at a screen every single day, and that's not necessarily the best way to learn. And I think the program helped a lot of leaders firstly feel like they could help and they could be a part of this kind of wider crisis that everyone was going through, but also it gave much more practical examples to students who were now sitting behind a screen and learning. So I think there's many creative ways to do this, and there are amazing charities out there as well that suffer from capacity issues. And this way, you can bridge the gap and help them do the amazing work, and maybe take a little bit of the admin burden off of them, or you can spark an idea in them that you do every single day in your day job, but it's not something that they come across regularly.
Yeah, having worked with a lot of nonprofits and just seeing the struggle to find even volunteers to be on the board, much less, like you said, the day-to-day stuff, they're invaluable. So that's a great idea too, a way for the employee to feel like they're giving back and get some meaning out of what they're doing, while also helping an organization doing good work. So, well, we've talked about quite a bit. Is there anything you want to talk about that maybe we haven't touched on before we move on?
I think one of the I was just reading all of the news that's coming out of COP. I probably will be there next year, but I'm not there this year. And I think we need to start focusing on action versus just having conversations. So what I would maybe encourage people listening in is, just think of one thing that you can do this week that will help a charitable organization. And I know sometimes it's difficult to visualize or to imagine, but it's actually not that hard. So if you feel like you don't have enough time, but you talk on social media a lot, just share a campaign of a charity so they have more reach. If it's the change of seasons, and if you are throwing out clothes, ensure that you're recycling or donating to charity shops so they can use it and raise money for the causes that they need to raise money for. So I think that would probably be the one thing. It's just about being very conscious about doing these things, and I aim to volunteer 120 hours per year, and that could be whether the board roles that I do with charities, but also smaller things. And I think that doing that consciously, firstly makes you really realize and be grateful for what you have. And that puts you in a positive mindset to be able to help more people. But secondly, it's very small things that actually can have a wide-ranging impact. Introduce someone who works in the third sector to someone else. Like, all these small connections spark a lot more than you realize. So I think there's a lot of paralysis right now. I think people are just scared and people just don't know what to do and how to act. So start small. Think of one thing you can do, and look for a charity. It's quite easy to find a charity these days. You could look at multiple charity commissions online, find a charity, and think about what you can do for them. So just one step at a time.
Yeah, absolutely. Create that mindset of giving and volunteering, like you said, because if we all just gave 1 or 2 hours of our time, even once a month or every week or whatever we can give, I mean, that really adds up in the long run. And then the volunteers who are, basically doing it as kind of a second job, second and third job, wouldn't have to work as hard and get burnt out if we all kind of did a little bit. So, well, thank you for sharing your insights in this space. And I know you've done a lot of great work in helping others understand what inclusivity is and kind of developing these cultures within their organizations. So what are some resources that you would share with our listeners who want to learn more about anything we've talked about today?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's so difficult to distill all of these sources of information sometimes. But what I've been really liking a lot, and this is maybe more for, actually no, it is a global newsletter. So Business Green as well as Carbon Brief have these award-winning newsletters, and they talk about all things climate. Um, I have read the Overstory, which is a fictional novel by Richard Power, won a Pulitzer Prize about 3 times now. So I totally recommend people to read it. It's a big, powerful story, but it also I love to learn through fiction. It helps me because I work in the space and I read a lot of policy. So stories help me translate some of this into feelings and emotions. So definitely would recommend the Overstory. Chapter Zero, if you are looking into working in the charity space, or you want to get some kind of extra learning around governance, especially in climate governance, so you can help smaller charities or even kind of be part of climate change in your organization. Chapter Zero is great. And finally, maybe the Net Zero Tracker. I've been spending way too much time on the Net Zero Tracker. I think it's a great resource and makes me feel positive because it shows you the uptick of regulation in the environmental space, and it's not just a policy tool. Anyone can have a look at it, so you can see how the world is doing when it comes to net zero.
Very good. And we will link to all of these in the show notes for those interested. I guess we'll go ahead and move on to our Green Life Hack portion of the show, where we share one thing that listeners can do in their everyday lives that will help them live more sustainably. So would you like to start us out?
Yeah, of course. So this is kind of one of my big missions for the upcoming years. Is I love fashion. I do buy clothes at different seasons, and I just kind of been deep diving into the fashion industry. It's the third largest polluter in the world at about 10% of our global emissions, and it is Black Friday season right now. So what I would say is, have a check on your consumption a little bit. Like, do you really need to buy all of those different things that you've probably got in your shopping cart? It just, probably from a financial standpoint will help as well. Yeah, have a quick check if it's something you absolutely need. And if you do want to buy more clothes, make sure you recycle. If you can buy from thrift stores or vintage stores, that really helps as well. And donate to charity shops too. So that would be my Green Life hack for today.
Perfect. And if you do buy things on Black Friday, try to buy from small businesses instead of the store that shall not be named online.
Exactly.
No, those are great tips, and definitely easy things people can implement. My Green Life hack is sort of related to holidays and holiday travel, and since a lot of us are going out of town on the holiday season, just to unplug your devices when you go out of town. Really, you could unplug them anytime if you're not using them, but especially when you're gone for long stretches, things that you're not going to need, like have a mini fridge that I, store extra food in. I'll unplug that, and just lights and whatever, those energy vampires. So remembering to, unplug things when you're gone, not just now, but anytime. And save a little money while you're at it on your power bill.
Oh, it's great.
So
find stuff to unplug now.
When you start looking at it all, it really amazes you at how many things require power in our lives now. How did we ever survive? Well, again, thank you so much for being on and sharing your knowledge with us. Where can we find you online?
Yes, so I'm quite active on Instagram and LinkedIn, and it's my name is Sandia Sabapathy, so you can find me there. We are also now pushing a lot of interesting content under Kaleidoscope, and that's also Kaleidoscope on Instagram as well as LinkedIn. And I can send you links if you want to pop it in the description. So those would be the places to find me. I'm very accessible in a nice way. Like I love talking to people about environment and social impact. So like, do send me a message whenever you find me and want to chat.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and we will link that in our show notes as well. And you can find the show Sustainably Geeky anywhere you listen to podcasts, on Instagram, Facebook, and still on Twitter right now. We'll see how that goes. We are also now on Buy Me a Coffee, so if you'd like to support our work, go to buymeacoffee.com/sustainably-geeky and buy us a plant, in our case, not a coffee. And me personally, you can find on Instagram and Twitter at @hetsgonabeme. Thanks again for being on. It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and for everyone listening, have a great rest of your day.
Have a good day.